bargaining, depression, acceptance. But no one warns you about the stage where you bury your only child while your wife sips cocktails with her lover thousands of miles away. I don't even know where to start. Maybe the day when the doctor sat us down and said, "Your son has leukemia." I remember every word. My little boy, only 2 years old at the time, was suddenly in a fight for his life. And I was in a fight to keep it together for him. The next few years were a blur of hospital rooms, chemotherapy sessions, and late-night prayers. I can still see him sitting there, too small for that big hospital bed. Some days he'd smile through it all, and I'd think, maybe we'll get through this. Maybe the treatments would work, and we'd beat the odds. Those little flickers of hope were the only thing keeping me going. But hope is cruel. Every time the doctors said there was progress, it felt like we were winning, only for another setback to hit harder than the last. His hair fell out, his body got weaker, and the sparkle in his eyes started to fade. Watching him like that tore my heart apart piece by piece. You know what made it worse? My wife wasn't really there. Physically, she was. Sometimes. But mentally, emotionally, she checked out long before our son got worse. She said work was her escape, that she needed to focus on something else to cope. I believed her because I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think we were both grieving in our own ways. But when our son's situation got worse, she took this work trip. She said it was for a conference, some big opportunity she couldn't miss. I told myself she'd be back soon, that she'd drop everything when it really mattered. She had to. She was his mother. She loved him, right? But she didn't come back. Not for the long nights at the hospital, not for the last moments when he held my hand and whispered, "Daddy, I'm tired," and not for the funeral. I kept telling myself there had to be a reason, some explanation. And now, here I am, standing at my son's grave, wondering how everything fell apart. Grieving not just for him, but for the life we were supposed to have, the family we were supposed to be. The air was heavy on the morning of my son's funeral. Friends, family, and neighbors surrounded me, all offering their condolences. Their faces blurred together, a sea of pity and sadness, as I stood by the casket that was far too small for someone who had barely begun to live. My hands clutched the sides of the podium as I delivered my eulogy. My voice cracked more times than I could count, but I pushed through. I talked about my son's courage during the years he spent battling leukemia, how he always managed to smile through the pain. I glanced at the chair where my wife should have been, empty. I told myself all week that she'd walk through those doors at the last moment, that no matter how distant she'd been, she wouldn't miss this. But here I was, standing alone, saying goodbye to the best thing that ever happened to us. As I returned to my seat, I felt a vibration in my pocket. My phone. I pulled it out, thinking it might be another condolence message, or someone asking for directions to the cemetery. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. It wasn't a condolence message. It wasn't from someone I knew. The text read, "I thought you should know the truth." Below that, there were pictures shocked me. My wife wasn't on a work trip. She wasn't grieving with her coworkers like she said she needed to. She was on a beach in Hawaii, laughing, holding hands with another man. The images were clear, undeniable. Her hair was tied back. She wore a sundress I'd never seen before, and she looked happy. Happier than she had looked in years. I stared at the screen, blinking, hoping it was some kind of mistake. I needed some air. My legs moved before my brain caught up, carrying me toward the parking lot. Outside, I stood under a tree, staring at those pictures, swiping through each one like maybe the next would make sense of it all. It didn't. She'd lied to me. While I was burying our son, she was sipping cocktails on a beach with someone else. There was no outlet for the rage boiling inside me, but I had to keep it all inside because there was still a funeral to finish. In that moment, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. I walked into the house, and everything felt different. I was still in the suit I wore to the funeral, but I didn't care. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a drink. I needed something to take the edge off. Sitting at the dining table, I pulled out my phone and looked at the message again. I couldn't just sit there. I needed answers. Maybe there was some kind of explanation. I had to know for sure. I scrolled through my phone and found Sarah's number. She was one of my wife's coworkers. Sarah was always friendly whenever we met at office events, so I hoped she could help me. When she picked up, I tried to keep my voice calm. "Hi, Sarah," I said. "It's me. I was wondering if you knew when my wife is supposed to be back from her work trip." There was silence for a moment. Then Sarah said, "Work trip? I don't think she's on a work trip. She took her annual leave last week." I forced out a laugh. "Oh, right," I said, pretending like it was no big deal. "I must have gotten mixed up. Thanks for letting me know." "Sure, no problem. Hope everything's okay," she asked before I quickly hanged up. I sat there, staring at my phone. She lied. She wasn't working. She had taken her leave to go on a vacation with him. While I was here, burying our son, she was on a beach with another man. I started thinking about everything that had happened in the last few months. How often had she been gone? How many times had she told me she was too busy with work when I was at the hospital with our son? Was she really working, or was she with him? My head was spinning with these thoughts. I thought we were a team, but now it felt like I had been fighting alone for a long time. I wasn't just grieving my son. I was grieving the life I thought I had, the life I thought we had built together. And now, everything felt like a lie. The days felt hollow, and I did more of thinking than anything else. I had nothing left to lose, not after burying my boy. My wife's secret affair woke something up inside me. Confronting her directly? That would have been too easy for her. Too much like an escape. No, I needed a plan, one she wouldn't see coming. A plan to make sure she felt even a fraction of the pain she'd caused. First, I logged into our joint bank accounts. She didn't know I'd kept all the details handy. I wasn't stupid. Marriage is trust, but it's also preparation. With a few clicks, I started moving money out. Not all at once. No, that would have raised a red flag. Bit by bit, I transferred it into new accounts I'd set up. Accounts she couldn't trace. By the time I was done, the balances in those joint accounts were practically dust. I left just enough in there so it didn't look suspicious at first glance. I didn't want her catching on too early. I wanted this to sting. Next, the house. Our house. The place where we raised our son. I couldn't stay there. Not with the memories, and not with her name still tied to it. I called an agent and sold it quietly. It wasn't about the money, although I need as much cash as possible to carry out all my plans. I was stripping away anything that tethered me to her. I didn't even tell her the house was on the market. She'd find out soon enough, and by then it wouldn't matter. Then came the personal touches. The closet full of her clothes, the jewelry, even her sentimental keepsakes. Things like the photo albums she left behind when she rushed off to her so-called work trip. I didn't burn them, tempting as it was. Instead, I pawned them. Every bracelet, every necklace, every little trinket she once held dear gone. If she didn't value our family, why should I value her things? When I was done, the house didn't look like ours anymore. And that's exactly how I wanted it. Clean slate. No reminders. No ghosts of a life that had fallen apart. And this was just the beginning. I found out she was back when my phone buzzed. At first I ignored it. I wasn't in the mood for her lies, not after everything. But the buzzing didn't stop. Finally, I checked the messages. "I'm home. What's going on? Why is the house sold? Where are you?" That was her first message. Then came more. "Dave, where's my stuff? Why can't I get in? Where are you?" It didn't take long for the panic to set in. She was confused, frustrated, desperate. I could picture her standing outside the house, looking at the sold sign and realizing something was very, very wrong. I didn't respond right away. I needed her to feel what I'd felt, abandoned, lost, out of control. After a few hours, I finally texted her back. "Let's meet. Cafe on Oak Street. Tomorrow at noon." The next day, I sat at a small table in the corner of the cafe, nursing a black coffee. I got there early, wanting to compose myself. I didn't want to walk into this with anger or emotion. That would give her power. I needed to stay calm, detached. She walked in right on time. I watched her scan the room until her eyes found me. "Dave," she started as she sat down, her voice sharp but controlled. "What the hell is going on? Why is the house sold? Where's all my stuff?" I didn't answer her questions. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. I slid it across the table and watched as she picked it up, her brow furrowing. "What is this?" she asked. "Divorce papers," I said, my voice steady. "You can sign them now or fight me in court. Either way, this marriage is done." For a second, she just stared at me, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Then, as expected, the excuses started. "Dave, you don't understand. I needed time to clear my head. Losing him was hard for me too. I just..." "Stop." I held up a hand, cutting her off mid-sentence. "You needed time? Our son was dying, and you left. You left us for someone else. Don't stand here and pretend you cared." Her face crumpled, and the defensiveness turned to pleading. "I made a mistake, okay? I wasn't thinking straight. But we can work through this. We can fix it." I leaned back in my chair, shaking my head. "No, we can't. The death of our son broke me, but your betrayal? That was the end. There's no going back from this." She reached out like she wanted to hold my hand, but I pulled back. "Dave, please," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "I love you. We can figure this out. Don't throw everything away." I let out a bitter laugh. "Love? Don't you dare talk to me about love. If you loved me or him, you wouldn't have done this. You made your choice, and now I've made mine." I stood up, leaving her with the papers and whatever regret she wanted to hold on to. I didn't wait for her to agree to the divorce. I didn't need her approval anymore. After everything she had done, she didn't deserve to have a say in how my life moved forward. That evening, I packed up the last of my things and left the city behind. I went to the woods to stay off-grid. The cabin I bought wasn't much. Tucked deep in the woods, it was small and simple, just enough for one person. But it was mine, and that made all the difference. I paid for it in cash, making sure there was no paper trail she could follow. It was my fresh start, away from her lies and the life we once shared. The woods were quiet, and for the first time in months, so was my mind. No neighbors peeking over fences, just the rustle of leaves and the sound of my own breathing. It was peaceful, though the silence had a way of creeping into my head, bringing memories I didn't want to relive. I didn't wait to see if she'd signed the divorce papers. It didn't matter to me anymore. I had shared the truth with everyone who mattered. Friends, family, even her boss. They all knew what she had done. The photos, the lies, the vacation she called grieving time, I exposed it all. I was making sure no one else saw her the way I once did. Then I cut her off completely. New number, new email, no forwarding address. I deleted every photo of her, every message, and every trace of her from my life. Everything that tied me to her was gone. For the first time in years, I wasn't checking my phone, waiting for her to call or text. I wasn't wondering where she was or who she was with. I was free. It wasn't easy. The nights were the hardest. I'd sit by the window of the cabin, staring out at the dark forest, my son's face flashing in my mind. I missed him more than words could ever explain. The grief was still there, heavy and unrelenting. But now it wasn't tangled up with anger or betrayal. It was pure, and I let myself feel it. This cabin, this solitude, was the start of something new. It wasn't a happy ending, not yet. But it was a beginning, and for now that was enough. I never expected to be the kind of man who loses everything in one day. My child, my marriage, my trust in people. But here I am with nothing. I want to ask you something, though. You've listened to my story, so now I need your opinion. If you were me, If you found out your wife was living her best life with another man while you buried your child, what would you do? Would you let it go? Would you confront her? Would you fight for justice? I did what I thought was right, but honestly, I'm still figuring it out. Life doesn't come with a manual for situations like this. All I know is that I can't go back to who I was. My son taught me to be strong, and if there's one thing I owe him, it's this: to keep moving forward, even when it feels impossible. So, tell me, what would you have done in my shoes? Because right now, I'm just trying to do the best I can.